Well, last week we began our pre-Easter series called 40. It's a series that's built around Lent, which is a 40-day fast that's intended to help us deepen our belief in the meaning of Jesus' death and his resurrection. So Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness right before he started his ministry. That's where the idea of 40 comes from. And so we're looking at that, but we're also looking at the 40 days that Jesus spent after his resurrection with his disciples, teaching them about the kingdom of God. And this series is basically about what we're calling the 40 life. How do we live a resurrection life? As we seek to live lives that are oriented towards God's kingdom, we want to identify with his death, which is that 40 days in the wilderness of fasting, putting things to death. We want to identify with that. But we also want to identify with his resurrection, this new life that he is offering us. This is a theme that is present throughout the whole New Testament. It's real simple. Nothing gets resurrected that hasn't died first. If you want to get resurrected, you do have to die first. Last week we read Romans 6, where Paul says, hey, if you've been buried with Christ in baptism, then you have died to the old you. You have died to the old creation. You've also been raised up, right, to walk in a new life. So the two questions that we're really sorting through during this series are, what are we still holding on to from the old world? That's the question that Lent raises. What are we still holding on to from the old world? And what can we pick up and run with from the new one that Jesus has initiated through his kingdom? That's the question of Easter. And this might sound a little bit strange at first, but we're talking about living this 40 life, this resurrection life, in light of four universal constructs that we all live in: space, time, matter, and relationships. So if Jesus' kingdom is among us, it must have some effect on the constructs that we live in every day. Right? Some of you are like, well, this is too sciencey. Well, God created the constructs that we live in. He's the one who came up with the idea of space. He came up with the idea of time. He came up with the idea of matter. These are all his things that he made. And he stepped back after he created them and he looked at them and he said, these are really good. These are really good things. So the premise of the series is that when we embrace the resurrection, when we embrace this kingdom lifestyle, we actually get to see these constructs that we wake up in every day differently. Something changes about the real world that we live in every single day. So last week we talked about space. If you missed that, you can check that out on the app. This week we're going to talk about time. Time. If we're living a resurrected life, how do we see time differently? Some of you are like, space and time are the same thing, Kevin. Did you know that? I did. But we're separating them for this series, so there. Now, time might be a sensitive subject for some of us, right? It's very possible that you might have gotten in a fight, maybe, I don't know, with your spouse this week about time. No? Nobody? Nobody did. Okay, cool. It might have sounded something like this. You're spending too much time here. Fill in the blank, wherever here is. Or I don't think we're getting enough time together. Or maybe you're sitting here thinking, man, we don't have enough time together. Now that you bring it up, we're going to fight about that on the way home. Some of you are thinking that. Maybe you're always pressed for time. Anybody have that feeling? You're just always pressed for time. And so you get to the end of your day, and you just want to veg out because you're totally and utterly exhausted from running around trying to meet all of the demands that have kind of been put on you. And we live in a culture that demands our time. We live in a culture that demands our time. It could be work-related. It could be family-related. It could be school-related. It could be all the stuff that comes with being a mom, all the stuff that comes with being a dad, the extracurriculars that your children or your grandchildren are in, and you're trying to keep up with all of that. Maybe it's all the stuff that you have to keep up with around the house, right? All this takes time. It all takes time. So I think it's true that no matter what stage of life we're in, there are different demands, at each stage of life that are kind of put on us, and there's a lot of stuff that's competing for our time. I talk to a lot of people that are very overwhelmed about this. A lot of us even feel like we're losing the battle with time. I know this is true because there's an extremely profitable self-help industry that's structured around how do we make more out of our time? What do we do? Right? So we buy books, we listen to podcasts, we go to conferences, we get trainings, all around time management. How can we manage our time? How can we make time more productive? How can we get how can we get the most out of every last drop of time? So this is a problem, and we all kind of feel it. So first question is really like where did time come from? What is time? Why do we experience time like we do? Well, I read this week that physicists have now concluded that there was, in fact, a beginning of time. There was? Some of you are laughing because it might sound like common sense, but it's been somewhat of a debate among scientists. But Stephen Hawking just said this pretty recently, actually. He said it's a really big deal that now scientists have discovered for sure that there was an actual beginning of time. Time did begin at some point. When was that? Well, the Bible makes a very strong argument. Here's what it says. Genesis 1:14-19. This is the claim. God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. So God created days, weeks, years, and seasons as rhythms for humans, that's us, to live in. Time was his idea. And like I said, he stepped back after he created time and he said, "Man, this is good work. I like this." They worked just the right way, these things did. What does that tell us? It tells us that all these things, days, weeks, years, seasons, all these things have intention. They have purpose. They are designed. These universal constructs of space, time, and matter are all designed to teach us something, actually to teach us a lot of things about who God is, about who we are, about what the world is that we live in. What happens when humans kind of try to live independently of the God who designed these things? Well, since we can't actually exempt ourselves from the constructs, right? Like nobody can wake up and say, I'm not doing daylight savings time. Well, you're going to be late everywhere. You can't just wake up and be like, today I'm exempting myself from space. No, you can't. You cannot do that. Today I'm not dealing with any matter. Nope, you can't do it. And so since you can't exempt yourself from the universal constructs that we all live in, if we try to live independently of God, what ends up happening is that we misuse these things. That's the best case scenario, is we misuse time, space, matter. Worst case is that we exploit them and we abuse them for our purpose, maybe even to make a name for ourselves. Time is perhaps the construct which indicts us the most in this regard. Right? Kind of exploiting time, getting every single last drop out of it for ourselves to make it the most effective and productive it can be. What happens when people like you and I, humans, live with God as the main character? What happens when we live in dependence on him the way that we were designed to live? Well, it means that we understand these constructs in a totally new light. We see them the way that God intended them to be seen. That's what happens in the kingdom. So I just want to talk about three specific ways, three specific things that are kind of redeemed in the kingdom, or can be if we see them this way. The first one is seasons. Seasons. Raise your hand if you like waiting on things. Cool, no one. Right? Maybe you're at an appointment or you're going to an appointment and you're running late or somebody else is running late. Maybe you're in line at the BMV. Who loves that? You guys love that. Maybe you're at the drive-thru McDonald's and it's taken way longer than the drive-through at McDonald's should take. You've been there? Some of you are like, I don't go to McDonald's. Yes, you do. They say, look, they sell 2 billion burgers a day. Somebody's going. You're trying to get somewhere, and you're hitting every stoplight. This happened to you, and you're just like, what are the odds that I'm hitting every stoplight? So you have to wait. Maybe it's not just that kind of thing. Maybe you're saving up to purchase something, and that's hard because you're like, I'll just put it on a credit card. I don't want to save. I don't want to wait 4 months to buy this thing. That's crazy. Maybe you're working on a project around the house. You just want it to be finished. You're tired of working on it. Maybe you're waiting for your child to get through that one phase, that one stage that they're in. You're just done with it. You cannot handle it. This is all process. These are all seasons, and these things are actually meaningful. These processes, these seasons actually can be a really powerful thing. There's this little command in Leviticus 19 where God is telling the people what they're going to do when they get into the land of Canaan. And he says, when you enter the land and plant all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count their fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. Don't eat it. But in the 4th year, all of its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord, also known as don't eat that either, give it to God. So first 4 years, you don't get to eat any of the fruit that it produces. In the 5th year, you are to eat of its fruit, that its yield may increase for you. I'm the Lord your God. What in the world is that about? When you get to this new land, you're going to plant trees, and then eventually they're going to start growing fruit, and when that happens, don't eat it. You cannot eat it. You actually have to wait for 3 years, don't eat it, and then the 4th year, take the fruit and give it to God. Why? I mean, that seems kind of crazy. Well, we sing this song here called Seasons, and it talks about being in the winter and kind of knowing that God is still at work, always in the winter, that he's always doing something, that he's initiating growth no matter what season it is, right? That's sort of this same concept, this idea that God is always at work, that he is always moving in us and around us, no matter what the external circumstances say. And so there are some practices that we can have, that we can take while we're in this life, essentially, while we're in this season, to remind us to be dependent on God. That's the way that I read Leviticus 19. He's like, these trees, like I'm the one bringing you into the land. I'm the one that's going to give the increase of the fruit. But you've got to depend. You've got to trust that this is me that's doing this, right? He is in the waiting. We're always trying to get past the waiting. We're always trying to get beyond it. I know I want to do that. I don't want to wait. I want to get beyond it. But there's actually something powerful that can happen in the waiting. The process that's involved in getting somewhere is an incubator for growth. It's maybe the best, most fertile ground for growth when you're in the middle of something. God wants to teach you something in the middle of that. He wants to do something in you to shape you somehow through that experience. You might say that the journey prepares us for the destination. So seasons are important. The second one is devotion. Let's talk about devotion. Acts 2 says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. This is talking about the first Christians. All came upon everyone because many signs and wonders were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to everyone as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. So the first Christians devoted themselves to sitting together under the apostles' teaching. They devoted themselves to their fellowship. They devoted themselves to breaking bread together. They devoted themselves to prayer. And all these things are communal. They were devoted to them together. How were they able to do this? Well, they laid down some of their other time commitments so they could pick these up. It's tempting, I know it is, to think of those first 3,000 disciples as more simple than us. They're simple, boring people who had nothing else to do, right? Surely we're more important than they were, right? Like we have more important jobs than they did. We hold up the world and make it go round more than they did, right? We have more demands on our time, right? Well, probably not. There are actually a lot of people throughout the New Testament who walked away from Jesus because they were not willing to make the sacrifice. They were not willing to lay the things down that they needed to lay down in order to follow him. These 3,000 were perhaps just more willing than the others, or maybe perhaps more willing than we are to go all in, to be truly devoted to this cause, to be truly devoted to Jesus. What does it mean to be devoted? Well, maybe you run into somebody, for instance, and you say, so tell me about yourself. And they're like, man, I love fitness. And first you're like, oh, that's weird. But okay, you love fitness. What would be the things that you would associate with that? It's like, okay, maybe you eat healthy, maybe you go to the gym, you at least exercise, maybe you have a gym in your house or something like that, right? So imagine that you start digging into that idea that they love fitness. They're just passionate about fitness. And like, so tell me about your habits. And you find out that they actually don't regularly go to the gym. They don't ever work out unless they have time, which is very rare, right? Eventually, in the conversation, you're going to be like, I actually don't think you're that passionate about fitness because you have not devoted yourself to fitness. But when you do meet somebody that's devoted to fitness, guess what? They're at the gym. If they have to get up at 5 a.m. every morning, they're going to the gym, aren't they? Because they're devoted to fitness. That's just one example. But there is no expression of devotion that does not involve setting aside time. You can't be devoted to anything if you don't give it time. So time is required for your relationship with God to thrive. Time is required for you to be a part of a community that is thriving. So set aside specific time to gather with other believers. Around here we call those base communities. And there's so much growth that can happen here. So don't only gather with a base community when you have some free time or where you can fit it in. That's not devotion. Put it on the calendar and make it as non-negotiable as soccer practice. That's devotion. See, we don't mind when other things ask us to be devoted, right? So if your kid plays a sport, guess what? You sign a little thing at the beginning. It's like a devotion contract. It's like, I will not miss the practices. But like, say your child goes to the coach and is like, I want to be a part of the team, but I'm not going to come to practice. Like, yeah, you're not going to be part of the team. And we're totally fine with that. But we kind of expect Jesus to just kind of be okay with, like, we're not going to set aside any time for you. But we love you. We're devoted to you. Now, I'm not saying this thing about base community because I'm really passionate about this. I'm not saying this to push a program. I'm saying this because Lindsay and I and our kids have experienced the church like we've never experienced the church before over the last 5 years as we have learned to go deep with other believers, to make gathering a high priority in our schedule because it didn't used to be. It was kind of like one of those things like, well, if we have time, we'll do it. We can't fit it in this season. Too busy, too much time. When we started making a high priority in our schedule, we started to experience the church in a way that we never have before. And we didn't start as devoted, but I would say that we are devoted to as a family now, of breaking bread, fellowship, apostles' teaching, prayer with other believers. And it's changed everything. If you don't have this, I want this for you. Because it changes everything. It truly changes everything. Now, that might require that you lay some things down. The kingdom life requires that you die to some things so that you can pick some other things up. Ironically, I'm running out of time. Here's the third thing. Sabbath, okay? Genesis 2, 1-3 says, Thus the heavens and earth were finished in all of their multitude, and on the seventh day God finished the work he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from the work that he had done in creation. Look, we all have the same amount of time in a day and a week and a year. God actually knew that this was going to be taxing on us if we were going to work all that time, and that's why he built in a day of ceasing into every week. We're not designed to go 24/7 trying to keep up. We're just not. Sabbath is designed to be a day that's set apart to cease from doing anything that we can, anything, basically, so we can be reminded that we're not the main character in the story. This is something that many modern Christians have thrown off for one of two reasons. One, because Jesus is our Sabbath rest. And that's true. Right? That's true. Through the work of the cross, we did enter a type of peace and rest that we have never experienced before. But that's kind of abstract. Another reason is that they associate the Sabbath with the Mosaic Law and the Ten Commandments. But Sabbath didn't originate there. Sabbath originated in the original creation. It is a part of the original design, the original rhythm that God created the world to work in. It's no less a part of the rhythm of creation than the sunrise, or having a child, or experiencing the change of seasons. That's why the command is to keep the Sabbath holy, not to make it holy, because he has already hallowed it, says. Now, I heard this week that the language of keeping something is akin to like a boy or a girl keeping their sexuality for the one person, setting it apart for the one person that it will belong to. Protected as something so valuable as to only be given away to the right person. That's what the idea of Sabbath is. It's something we protect and we give to God. Now, some of you are thinking, there is no way. Like if gathering with community is level 5, Sabbath is level 9, right? I mean, who has time to stop for 24 hours doing? Stop striving for 24 hours. Who has time for that? That's ridiculous. Totally countercultural. But there's two truths that are presented to us through the Sabbath. They're both confrontational to our sensibilities. The one is that God is king. The second one is we're not. God is king and we're not. So, step aside. Set your eyes on his work, not yours. Enjoy his creation. Enjoy your husband. Enjoy your wife. Enjoy your kids. One of the most frustrating things about any conversation about Sabbath is that it automatically goes into a conversation about legalism. And that causes us to miss the whole point. Jesus said to the religious leaders of his time, hey, you're missing the point. Sabbath was created for man, for humans. Right? It's actually a gift. So real quick, some ways to observe the Sabbath. Pick a day. I don't think the day really matters. Prepare for it. There's a lot of work that goes into it to be able to do it. Third, learn the art of saying no. Fourth, be with God. Be with the people you love. Turn off your screens. Eat your pancakes. Okay. Here's I guess, the big thesis of this teaching. To redeem time is to actively acknowledge that we are not the main character and that our lives are a part of something bigger. We are not the main character and that our lives are a part of something bigger. When we have that in mind, we redeem time.